Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today I'm joined by Paul Powers. He's the founder and CEO of Physna, and we'll learn what that's about during the show. But first, Paul, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about hybrid work, remote work, what you learned during this period of the pandemic, the 2.5 years. What have you really learned, your top takeaways about hybrid and remote work?
Before the pandemic, we didn't really have remote work. Everyone was in the office. And we had a pretty strong view about that. We really thought that was the right way to do things. Obviously, the pandemic was a forcing function. We didn't have that option anymore. We had to make people go remote. And what we've learned is that there's really pros and cons to both. I don't think that at least the current phase of technology, we're in a place where a Zoom meeting will 100% replicate, the interactions that you can have in an office, especially when it's like group collaboration or longer, creative sessions. It's kind of hard to get everyone to just stay laser focused, not moving their body, looking at a screen that long. And you just don't get the same interaction. But I will say that we can have more meetings than we could have in the past, right? You can have a more packed schedule, which can be good and bad. And we've also learned that there's a lot of importance in actually taking time, especially when people are remote, to try to replicate to the best of your ability the interaction you would have in the office. And so at Physna, we have a hybrid approach now, and that's because our policies changed. We've realized that everybody has a different situation. Everyone has a different preference. And so what's most important is that we get the absolute best talent, and then them all being in the same location is nice, but it's secondary. So we don't really care anymore. Like, we have people all throughout the United States. Maybe half of them are within driving distance of the office, and the other half, or more even than half, are not. And what we'll do is we'll occasionally have events at the office where we try to bring as many people as possible and try to have, just have it really focused around what the office is good at, bonding as a team, spending time together, and then also these more creative collaborative sessions. And it's amazing how much progress you'll make in the office versus virtually. But there are definitely people who, they get distracted in the office. They can't focus in the office and they prefer working remotely. So we respect that.
I want to ask you about a specific thing you said. So kind of recreating remotely the aspects of working in the office. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, get in depth, because what I've seen with my clients when I help them transition to remote work, hybrid work, is that there are certain benefits to creating new ways of collaborating that are specifically not like the ways that you would work in the office. Because of course, the remote setting is different than being in the office. There are all sorts of exchanges. For example, asynchronicity. So asynchronicity has a lot of benefits as well as demerits, right? Synchronously, you can exchange communications, we can talk easily and so on. But asynchronously, that's really helpful for people who are introverted, who need time to think and explore ideas internally before speaking. For people who are more pessimistic, who again need time to explore and think about ideas and get them perfect in their minds before expressing them. And that asynchronicity gives people time to think and explore ideas for innovation, creativity that you wouldn't have in a typical in-office setting. So that aspect, I think, has been beneficial for my clients who've been finding, oh, this is an aspect of remote that we would have never thought about. And we're specifically trying to not recreate the office experience through having more asynchronicity. What have you found regarding that?
Asynchronicity, as you said at the beginning, has pros and cons, right? So you're right. There are very many ways in which it's beneficial. And there are also very many ways in which it's not necessarily the right venue. Like, let's say that you're having a meeting. So, if it's something that's not urgent, something that's more procedural, something that can wait a while, asynchronous is better because you're not disrupting somebody's flow of work. They can stay focused. They can come back to all these things that are not pressing. And that's fine. There are some conversations that I think really are best had face to face, as literally as possible. I mean, either video to video if you can't do face to face in person, but there's nothing that replaces that in person experience as of today, right? With current technology. So things like really hard conversations, like about like performance reviews, maybe they can be tough, and so you want to make that as personal and as soft, I guess, as you can, so that you can say what you actually need to say. I think there are also some creative sessions where you don't want to be asynchronous. You actually want that collaboration to happen in kind of a cloud, right, where people are talking and throwing ideas around. And it's difficult to do that when it's also slower to do that when it's asynchronous, because you're not getting, that sort of that mind melding isn't happening at the same time. But to try to overcome that, we do things that try to introduce synchronicity and face-to-face communication, and just what I would call like a replacement for time by the water cooler, into with the traditional in the traditional way of thinking, while being remote. And it's not 100% the same, but a couple ideas of what we do is, like, we have regular stand-up meetings when we require that people are there and that they have video on. That helps more than if they're just on the phone, right? And we know sometimes people are driving or they're doing something else, like that's fine, but for 99% of the time, over video. The other thing that we do is we'll have events sometimes that are outside of work, and they're optional, right? But they're things that are meant to put people into as realistic of an experience as possible with each other. And we found to be the most exciting thing. And since we're a 3D tech company, everybody in the company has a VR headset, at least an Oculus or something. Great. And so what we'll do is every couple of weeks, for like a half an hour or something after work, there'll be 30 minutes, and people can stay on longer if they want to, but where we all get on, and we'll be on like Rec Room in in Oculus and playing paintball or laser tag or whatever, just doing something where you're able to kind of bond a little bit more directly with somebody, out of not that it's not purely on a work-based context, and that's just helpful, right? You don't have that communication level. And the third thing that we do beyond that. This is something that it's not just me, but other people do this as well. But I think it's especially important for me because, as CEO, I'm not always talking to like literally every single individual in the company every day. There's just too many. So to make sure that I don't go too long without, keeping that communication line open, at least once or twice a week, I'll have just at random what we call a skip level meeting. In other words, somebody that I don't normally meet with, somebody who might be like a, individual contributor on a certain area of the software that I just normally don't interact with. And we have 30 minutes together, and there's no agenda. It's just, hey, we can talk about whatever you want. I have some probing questions if they're shy, and then it's not awkward, but it's not meant to be a performance review. It's really there to replace that kind of like, walking by each other in the hallway or being at a water cooler in the traditional office sense, right? And just chit-chatting. And so it normally is about work, but sometimes they just talk about their hobbies. That's fine, right? It creates that emotional bond, which I think it's easy to overlook how important that is when it comes to things like employee retention, employee happiness, and morale. And so investing a little bit into it's been worthwhile. But of course, it doesn't replace. It's not one-to-one with being in the office. It's just a supporting measure.
Well, let's get into specifically that 3D company. Obviously, you have that. You come from a 3D background. So why don't you introduce folks who might not know about Physna to what Physna does, and then explain how that aspect of focusing on 3D and so on influences your perspective on remote work, which of course it must, and you mentioned that it does. So please go ahead.
Sure. So Physna is short for physical DNA. And in a nutshell, what that means is we take essentially the physical world and we turn it into code. And we do that by way of 3D models. So they can be just things that are designed on your computer. They can be scans, whatever. And we take these models from all kinds of formats, over 30 different formats from different disciplines, not just like CAD, but also like AR, VR, metaverse type formats, the 3D printing formats, et cetera. And we neutralize it in the sense that we care about the geometry and the features that are present in these models, not about like, the way that the software views it, like the original software views it. And what that allows us to do is essentially turn 3D into code. And so what that allows us to do in turn is to do anything with a model that you can do with text, let's say, right? So things like autofill, you're in the process of designing and we can predict what you're designing, or things like searching with the geometry itself. You upload a model, we'll tell you everywhere, like not only we take every other model that's a duplicate of that or similar and how they're different, but we'll show you everything that's inside that model, everything that's a model's inside of. And we can even use that relationship matrix that we build to show things, to use it for machine learning, make predictions about how well a part will perform, what kind of material it should be made out of, how much it should cost. And And a place where this is also present is on our site, thangs.com. And that's been a big success. That's something that we just launched a couple of years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. And in less than 2 years, it reached over 7 million users.
Hmm.
I think we're roughly
Nice.
about 14 million models. Some weeks there are more models uploaded to Thangs than all the other 3D platforms combined. It's really, really taken off. Fastest growing 3D community in history, and also the world's largest 3D search engine. And so it's kind of like a Google for 3D, again, using that core
Mhm.
technology. And then in addition to that, we're building on top of it like a GitHub for 3D, if you will. And that's to automate workflow. So a version control automation, workflow automation, allowing people to work in parallel with each other. And that increases productivity. So whether you're an engineer, designer, like a 3D designer, making parts for video games or characters for video games or virtual reality or what have you. And it speeds things up a lot, even just from the process
Mhm.
perspective. Instead of having to check out a model out of a PLM system and something taking 5 days with 5 people, that same process can take 2 days for 5 people. It really speeds up the process. And because we have geometric search, you also have the ability to make sure that you're reusing things that you already have.
Mhm.
And so that's another aspect of the business as well. And so those two make up Physna altogether. And with Physna, I should say
Nice.
how we make money. On the enterprise side, there are APIs. So things like geometric search, 2D to 3D. So take a picture and find 3D model, and comparing models, and also making any model that we find viewable in augmented reality. Those are APIs that we have.
Mhm.
There's many use cases for them, but I'll give a really simple one just to be brief. Let's say that you're out in the field and you see something that you like and you take a picture of it. We can find the 3D model for it. We'll see that's exactly what this is. Because we have
Yeah.
3D search, we can say here are alternative parts, and also this is where all these parts go, etc. And then let's say you want to know, okay, well, how do they compare? Then we have the compare API, and you can see, okay, this is probably the one that I want. But let's say that part is something you're going to install somewhere, and you don't have the model of what you're installing something on. Like, let's say you're going to put something on like a machine, and there are holes where you had to put the screws through it. It can be kind of hard to know, is this the right version, or is one that looks slightly different the right version? I don't know. And so you can either get the parts or buy the parts and see what fits, or you can just measure them mechanically. It takes forever. So we added on the AR function, which takes any file of any format. And even with your phone, it'll just, it's one button, opens the camera, and then superimposes it on whatever's in front of you, and you can see if it lines up or not. And so those are not the only use cases for this, but those are examples of use cases for how you can use our APIs.
So given that you are really experts in 3D, I would have thought that you would have developed some, you said the current technology is not very good for replacing in person-to-person contact. I would have thought that you would have worked on or tried to explore using something like virtual reality
Oh,
to
we do.
interact with each other in the office. So is that something that you do? Tell me
Yeah,
more
as I
about that.
mentioned, we do all have Oculus headsets, etc. It's just
Yes.
that now there's a new headset that's coming out from Meta that I think is going to be much, much, much better than what we have
Okay.
with Oculus Quest 2. But the old headsets and the old experiences, try spending 8 to 12, however many hours, wearing something that's fairly
Sure.
heavy, something that's kind
That
of
is heavy.
inconvenient. You're not going to do it all day. Some people get a little
Sure.
nauseous from it because the refresh rate's not perfect. And so just as that technology advances, and also as there are more useful applications, or at least simpler to use useful
Mm-hmm.
applications, then I think it'll become closer and closer and closer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the bar is very high for replacing the in-person interaction in a
Sure.
workspace, because things like the expression on your face is not something that is currently being represented in a virtual reality environment, right? They don't currently use that. They hand gestures sometimes they can represent, and that's helpful, right? That is part of
Yes.
communication. But I think that for that to be really, really similar, maybe you don't need a haptic suit where you can shake each other's hands and feel it. Maybe that's unnecessary, but at least being able to see facial expressions
Hmm.
and movements, picking up on body language, I think will be a big part of it. And again, it has to be something that's convenient and comfortable enough for you to wear for an extended period of time. Otherwise, nobody will.
Hmm.
So you kind of have to be able to
Yeah.
do everything in that environment and choose to use it to interact with other people or not. Whereas right now, you're kind of committed. I'm here to interact with other people. It's really hard to work on this. So
Yes.
that's
No,
kind of
it is heavy.
what I mean
Yeah.
by the technology needs to catch up a bit.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. No, definitely is heavy right now. I'm imagining something like a much more advanced version of Google Glass, combined with video like Zoom. So where you can see the other person's expression and you can also see in a 3D setting. That I
I
think
think
would be closer.
I think we'll see a few iterations of this, right? One will be purely virtual reality, which is similar to what you experienced today, maybe with an improved headset and improved experience. One will be augmented reality, where, to your point, something similar to Google Glass. I think Apple Glass is probably going to be
Yes,
what does,
better.
assuming that all the rumors of it are true and it's as powerful as we hope it
Sure.
is, then maybe that starts to replace some of those experiences. You can actually see people in a
Hmm.
sense. And then there's mixed reality, which is actually the next headset coming out from Meta will be mixed reality. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. How much of it is augmented versus virtual. In other words,
Hmm.
adding to your world versus trying to, replace it. And I think that we'll find there's going to be all kinds of programs testing what people like. And, we will naturally figure out which program makes the most sense based on adoption. And I think in the next couple of years, you'll see a lot of people saying there's really not a whole lot of reason to meet in person, other than, I guess being able to go to a bar together. But maybe
Sure.
that you going to your refrigerator, getting a beer together might work too. Who knows? We'll find
Yeah.
out.
I mean, of course, I agree with you that there are some aspects of in-person interaction that I don't know if we can ever fully replace all the aspects of in-person interaction. Well, in the foreseeable future, who knows what will happen, 50 years from now. But
We'll all be in a
for
matrix, and then it won't matter. You won't even know that you're
sure,
having person
that's true. That's true.
interaction.
We'll have
Right?
singularity by then, right?
Yeah, very, very possible.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
And our listeners can research what that is. We're not going to go in depth to explain that for those who don't know. We're geeks on that. Now, I want to go back to something you said about the emotional bond, because I think that's really important. And we're talking about the emotional bond and how that's something that's quite a bit harder to recreate in a virtual setting. So I'm
yeah.
really glad that you're having those meetings, those one-on-ones, kind of random people in the company. What I'm finding with my clients is that there are ways through in a virtual setting to recreate some of these virtual water coolers. So one of the things we do is have a channel for individual teams. We actually call the virtual water cooler for, let's say, 6 to 8 people team. And there's a personal channel for that team in Slack or Microsoft Teams, whatever the team uses. And then in the morning, they start the morning by sharing, hey, how are you feeling right now? What's going on in your personal life lately? What's one fact about yourself or the world that other people don't know? And then what you're planning to work on that day. And then they respond to 3 other people who shared the same thing that day. And so it's kind of a replacement for that virtual water, in that virtual water cooler sense, for the water cooler, it's kind of thing that you would chat about. And so it creates
Yeah.
that engagement, that emotional bond among teams. And that's a native virtual remote context. That's not something that's exactly what you would do in the office, right? Do you have
There
anything
is a
like
value to
that
that. I
that
mean,
you
we also have very similar Slack channels. Like we have a random channel, and we have a few different channels
yes.
that people are interested in different. They have similar hobbies, right?
Mhm.
And those are great. And there is an advantage to that in the sense that if you post something in a larger group about yourself, like, hey, I just went on this hike, and we all love hiking or whatever, and look at the pictures I took.
Good.
This is an example. You might not be able to tell every person in the office in a normal condition. It'd be kind of weird to go around to the 6 people in the office who also like hiking and be like, guess what? That might not be
Yep.
something that you would share as directly in an office environment as you would in the Slack channel. So it's not like, I think they augment each other. Like, I don't think that one's better or worse than the other. They just have their strengths and
Mhm.
weaknesses. And until
Yeah.
we find a way to totally augment or replace the in-person interaction, I think they're still going to have for the next at least few years, and they'll still have a place or an emotional EQ value being next to
Mhm.
people.
Yep, that makes sense. One of the things that my clients do, what I advise my clients is to do offsites occasionally.
Yeah.
So get all the people together for, ideally once a quarter or at least once every 6 to 12 months, but once a quarter is really great. So get them all from around the country, wherever they happen to be, and have a 2-day retreat. And
Yeah.
that creates that sense of team bonding and belonging. I mean, there's going to be some official things, but also some social things where you have fun, like a puzzle room experience or so on, something like that people enjoy doing. I'm curious if you found something like that useful.
We do something. We do. Yeah, we at least have one true offsite a year, but we also have
Mm-hmm.
like quote unquote on-site offsites where people who will come into the office and It is for, I mean, they're working regular hours. It's not like it's just a bonding, but typically, like, actually, we did one last week where people were here for a few days. They came in from across the country. The office was packed,
Hmm.
and we had, but every day we try to make it a point to, at some reasonable hour to say, okay, hey, let's stop working for a bit and like let's actually go out. Like, we have a park next to the office, so we set up like outdoor games, and we were playing cornhole and kickball and all of that. And then some people went out for like little group happy hours between different teams and kind of got to bond that way. And so that's something that I would say, roughly on a quarterly basis, give or take, we'll do something similar to that. And then, when and as possible, we try to have something maybe even more team focused than that throughout the year, once or twice.
Excellent. Now, and the one thing I want to talk about, the last thing, big point, was about talent. So you said you're focusing on talent. And I think this is really interesting. When we're looking at surveys, we see consistently that about a third of all workers who can work remotely want to work remotely. And the number is higher for tech workers who can work remotely, wanting to work remotely. And that does not mean they're not going to be coming in for that, once a quarter activity for a couple of days, but they do want the rest of the time to work remotely for a number of reasons, whether they want, working mothers want to take care of kids, or some people are shy and some tech people tend to be a little bit autistic, which, not in the pejorative sense, it is true, where they tend to be kind of have a little bit less social. They have some social awkwardness, some anxiety, and they want to interact with people less. And of course, for all variety of reasons. And so when you're thinking about talent, and when you're thinking about people who want to come to the office, who don't want to come to the office, is that at all a consideration in how you hire people, or is it just kind of purely based on merit, what they can contribute to the company?
Purely based on merit, what they contribute to the company. We have a number of people in the company who have very, very different opinions about working in person. Some people, I've heard everything. I've heard people, and the great thing about having this hybrid situation is we do have a full-time office. You can access 24 hours a day. It's our place, and anyone, anytime can go there. And there are people who take advantage of that. They're in the office constantly. And we have other people who, even though they live right next to it, are very, very rarely in the office. And what we found is that, especially nowadays with so many companies offer remote work, you don't really want to be the one that's saying, no, you have to go in. Also, and that's not even like a work preference thing anymore. Now you're getting into health, because, even though COVID, knock on wood, isn't as big of a risk today as it was maybe a year or two ago, to most people who are vaccinated or who've been exposed or whatever, it's still a big risk to some. And there are different perceptions about how a big risk that is. There are, people have different health situations. They live with people with different health conditions themselves. They might have an elderly, parent or grandparent they have to take care of, or live with someone who's immunocompromised. And, we don't go digging into that aspect of everyone's life. We just respect what they choose. And so one thing that we've tried to, this is actually very new. So actually, like brand new. After the get together last week, we realized, hey, it was actually, we had some people who said, oh, they didn't want to come because they were worried about COVID, and because at least at the moment in Ohio, most people don't wear masks almost anywhere anymore. Like, you rarely see people wear a mask even in a crowded indoor setting as of, Q4 2022. So as a result of that, they were worried that if I go in there, not many people are going to be wearing masks, and then I'm exposing myself, even if I wear a mask, maybe I'll stand out awkwardly wearing one. So what we're going to do in the future as a result of that is we're just kind of partition the office a bit and say there's an area where you must wear a mask, right? Like, you have no choice. Even if I don't care what your opinion is on the thing, if you go over in that area, you can wear like a real N95 mask. And then another area of the office where it's optional. And so people who are worried about it, they have the option of being there in the office all the time, and anyone can go over and spend time with them, but masked. And it's significantly far away from the other area of the office. And it's, there's no way that it'd be very, very hard for them to cross-contaminate. And then on the other front, if you said like, oh, I'm not that worried. It seems like there are enough people wearing masks on the other side, or there are not that many people there. Of course you can go over to the other side. And no one's keeping anyone anywhere. It's just that there's one side of the office where you have to wear a mask. And that's something that we're going to experiment with moving forward, just to see how, if that helps people, because we want everyone to feel welcome. And it's awkward for someone to say like, oh, I'm sensitive, so please everybody wear a mask because of me. No one's going to say that. And so we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people just to kind of, act according to their preferences.
That makes a lot of sense. I know with my clients, when there is a percentage of people who are immunocompromised, right? And they are just not coming into work. And, I had a couple of clients who said that, well, we want everyone to come in at least 1 day a week. And, those people left. That's just, they were not willing to do that, to put themselves in harm's way. So I think it's really good, first of all, that you're allowing people that flexibility to work remotely, whatever they want, but also having that ability to come in and know that everyone's going to be masked in that section. That's really good. You're making people feel welcomed. Excellent. Yeah. Now, is there anything else I haven't asked you about hybrid work, remote work, anything else that you would like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
No, I do think that it'll be worth keeping an eye on even though as I said at the beginning, we're not at a point where technology can replace human interaction completely. It is an area to keep a very close eye on, because I don't think that it's necessarily all that far away where you'll be maybe not 100%, but much closer to that real life interaction with people, with reasonably acquirable and affordable devices. And, hopefully within the next 12 months, maybe even sooner, but definitely the next couple of years. And so I think that that's going to really start to make things even more flexible, which I think will be great for everybody.
I agree. And given your expertise in the 3D sphere, your word is to be taken seriously. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And thank you very much to the audience for checking out the podcast. Again, my name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, the CEO of Disaster Avoidance, the future work consultancy that sponsors the podcast. Please make sure to subscribe to it wherever you checked it out, on YouTube, on iTunes, and please leave a review. We'd love to hear what you think, and that helps make the podcast better. All right, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.